Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. Troy Casey, the founder and brewer of Casey Brewing and Blending, is here this week, talking about fruits and woods, microbes and time, the glaring attention that comes with being a hype brewer, and how climate change impacts beer. We're able to bring this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support journalism in the beer space, and you can help us too. Learn more by emailing sponsor@beeredge.com. And speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by the World Beer Awards. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair of judges for the U.S. portion this year, and we're bringing experienced, fair-minded, and engaged judges to Washington, D.C. later on this summer to blind taste test beers and to hand out medals. The World Beer Awards ensures that each beer is judged both rigorously and fairly to give its best chance in the competition. So if you're a professional brewer, learn more about the competitions and categories and sign up to enter at worldbeerawards.com. Again, check out worldbeerawards.com to learn more and to sign up. Also, a reminder to visit beeredge.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can catch up with the Beer Edge podcast, and you can go to the merch page, which is filled with This Week in Rauk Beer gear, as well as Defend Pilsner mugs. And as always, This Week in Rauk Beer, join us on Facebook. Just search the group name, or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at TW Rauk Beer. By now, you might be familiar with Troy Casey and his beer career. After graduating from the University of California at Davis, he took a job with the company then known as MillerCoors, working in their Colorado brewery in the AC Coors division. It was a research and development facility where they would test out various recipes, noodle around with new ones, and see if anything stuck that could eventually be scaled up to the big production brewery. It's a brewer's dream. Great equipment, access to ingredients, and some of the smartest beer science minds at arm's length. It also allowed for some creative license. And while there, he got the idea to brew a lambic-style ale and assembled it, barreled it, let it sit, also tested it compulsively until it was ready. And it lit a fire in him. And soon enough, he and his wife, Emily, decided to open up their own brewery where he could embrace sour and wood. And he could really just let the beer style that had captured his heart and mind thrive and grow. The response was immediate, with fans coming from around the country to visit the brewery in Western Colorado and lining up by the hundreds at beer festivals. As you'll hear, the brewery has since grown and new styles have joined the mix, but there's still a twinkle in his voice when he talks about the style that started this part of his career. I've had the occasion to talk with Troy in the past, and when I saw his name on the list of participating breweries for Wakefest in Miami, the event going to be held this weekend by the J. Wakefield Brewery, I was hoping to catch up in person. Alas, he has other plans. I'll still be there. But that's where we're going to start, with a look at the festivals and the world's pushing forward amid a pandemic for in-person experiences. He spoke to me from Colorado. Here's our conversation. I was looking at the calendar, and this upcoming weekend seems to be a fairly big one in terms of beer that I don't think we've had in the last 2 years or so. Wakefest is happening down in Miami. The side project invitational is happening in St. Louis. Good Word Brewing is doing their Little Beer Festival in Georgia. You're going to be going to St. Louis, you mentioned, before we started recording, to do the side project fest. Pre-pandemic, let's start there. What was your approach to beer festivals and the ones that you wanted to do, that you got excited to do? Because I imagine you got invited to a lot and you just couldn't go to all of them. So did you have criteria pre-pandemic?
Geez, it's hard to think about that far back. Honestly, like a lot of the criteria,
I mean, it was only 19 years ago that the pandemic started. Like that.
Yeah. It was the criteria would be if it fit into our schedule, because if one of our guys or myself was able to make it happen, and then if it kind of fit with our brand. So if it was alongside brewers who were also doing specialty sour beers like that, that's what we were looking for sure. So whether it was like sour focused and with some of our peers doing the same kind of things.
That's interesting. I don't know why. I would think that brewers would want to stand out with their offerings at a festival, but you want it to be alongside like-minded brewers.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a testament to, like what we think about our beer, in the sense that even if it was around other sour brewers, that it would still stand out because of what we do that's unique, whether that's because of the moderate acidity and the drinkability of the beer, or on the other end of the spectrum, the intense fruiting that we do as well. I think that's and the complexity that can still come with that. So I think we would be able to still stand out even if it was just for a sour beer festival.
Did you, if you can think back that far, and at festivals where there were choice inside of the same category, were you trying to do market research as well? Like, were you trying to see what other people were doing to stay true to your own vision to sort of help keep you grounded, or gaining consumer feedback at those things?
I think the biggest thing we saw was, especially we opened up in 2014, and so
yeah.
I think maybe if I'm just gonna gun to my head, if I said 2016, whenever
the show is not that violent, but yeah.
The whenever WeldWorks started coming out with all of their amazing stouts, that I think was the biggest thing that we would see at festivals. Whereas when we first got into it, the first beer that people wanted to taste were sour beers at events, whether it be like what was that festival, like the Pints for Prostate before GABF.
Yeah, the Denver Rare Beer Tasting.
Yeah, Denver Rare Beer Tasting. When Crooked Stave had their sour festival during that GABF week.
Yeah, I remember
starting to see the demand and the push for people. What they wanted to try first were those barrel-aged stouts. And so I think that became very apparent very quick around that time.
And did you ever have thoughts of like, okay, I gotta rethink what I'm doing?
Not at that point, but now definitely we've got let's just say maybe around 20, less than a couple dozen bourbon barrels filled right now. So nothing on the scale that some of the people that are doing it the best in the state are doing, but it's definitely something that we want to have available for our customers, whether that be on draft at any given time, or a bottle drop here or there to some of our like our membership club.
So you mentioned that when you're doing barrel aged sours, when you're thinking about your fruited beers, you talked about moderate and easy on the acidity. A lot of those barrel aged stouts, those adjuncted stouts, can really be blunt objects that hit you over the head. How have you approached making those beers? Do they have you tried to employ a similar approach that you've done to your traditional sours with stouts, or are you just going from the traditional playbook of let's go boozy, sugary, knock everybody out kind of thing?
It's kind of what even though we talking about the moderate acidity, I would argue that we do go crazy with as far as the fruiting level goes. And so okay. And so there is, for some of the beers that we do, there is that extreme of the fruit, which has definitely gained or increased over time. When we first started making those fruited sour beers, our most intense fruit beers were 2, maybe 3 pounds per gallon. And now we're in that 4 to 5 pound per gallon range. And that's just based on what we like, because we're making those beers to try to showcase the fruit, but it's also what the customers were looking for. So I think with stouts, we kind of are doing the same thing. We've really only done one release of an adjuncted stout, which had a lot of vanilla for us, but still nothing compared to what I'm hearing of other breweries that are doing. So while the vanilla is apparent and very in my opinion, intense, it's definitely in the eye of the beholder, if you will. So with our stouts, we are going for, again, we do so little of them. So we are going for the on the sweeter side. I think the boozy aspect, like you mentioned, is almost a requirement for this style of beer from an oxidation standpoint in the barrel for as long as it sits, as well as a micro biological aspect. So I think that's kind of in my opinion, for a brewery that doesn't pasteurize our stouts, it's kind of a non-negotiable, if you will.
Are you thinking about next generation of these stouts, or where you'd like to see these styles evolve in your own brewery?
Honestly, for us, it's just the fitting them into our schedule and being able to store them away for as long as we can. So no, we're not thinking too far on it. Again, we make as many of these beers as we would, it feels like as many, even less than we do lagers or IPAs. And so for us, it's kind of just a nice thing to have. We're not trying to significantly grow that aspect of our business. Maybe that's what we should be doing. But at this point, it's just something that we're playing around with. And once we figure out what we like about the beers that we're making ourselves, that's when we can continue to move in that direction as well. So for us, we're so small and our production is very small overall, but those barrel aged stouts, it's just a drop in the bucket for us. So it's kind of just something nice to have every once in a while.
I know the pandemic has disrupted everything, but if you look back to 2014 and goals that you had for the brewery and where you are now, how do those square with each other?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think. So back then when we started, I was the only full-time employee. We were only open once a month, and cut to 2018, we bought our own brew house. And so we were previously brewing on other people's facilities and making our work with our raw materials. 2018, we kind of got big enough that it was justifiable to get our own brew house. So we expanded we bought some other tanks for fruiting our sour beers. And those are single wall bright tanks that we just use to ferment the fruit before we package it. And so with that order, knowing that we had our own brew house, I bought 3 7-barrel uni tanks for eventually being able to do with the thought that we would eventually play around with traditional styles of beer. And we didn't use them for months, maybe a year, close to a year. And I kind of every day looking at them, wondering what are we going to do? What are we going to do with these? And then it was really like, all right, if we're going to make these beers and want to sell them in an appropriate amount of time, we really need another tap room. As you might, I think you've been to our facility before in Glenwood. Yeah. And so we are right on the river with 0 foot traffic. And so for us to be open as much as we would never really go through any volume of these sour beers. So I started writing a business plan for a second tap room, second facility. And lo and behold, a space opened up in downtown Glenwood. And we got up and running to the public in around Labor Day 2019. So to think about 2014 and 2015 to 2019, that was a pretty crazy jump. And for us to be here now, having gone through what we've gone through, we've got including all of our taproom staff, we probably have about 12 employees right now. So that's pretty crazy. Yeah. And sending beer, little drops of beer to all over the world, which we pivoted to during the pandemic, and seeing the demand for our beer in places like China and Korea was very, very crazy. So yeah, it's really nuts to think about where we're at here, almost a little bit over 8 years from when we first signed our lease.
I don't know enough about international drops or targeted drops. I know brewers talk about it. They see some virtue in it. What has been the benefit for you, to send beer to Korea, for example?
It's like during the pandemic, it was really helpful because we saw a loss in our taproom sales. And so to offset those with selling a little bit of beer wholesale to those accounts from a financial standpoint was very beneficial. Okay. But from a brand development standpoint, I think it's also really critical. I've been thinking a lot about it lately. When you think about, everything, what's the expression? Everything that's old is new again. Sure. Even though we're we're very boutique brewery, you could look at our business as a case study, just very similar to a lot of other brands, like even big beer brands, as they've gone through, growing as well. So if you think about Coors Light, or no, Coors Banquet, when Coors wasn't available west of the Mississippi or whatever the legend was, how in demand it was.
I mean, Smokey and the Bandit.
Yeah, exactly. Same with Leinenkugels, but the opposite direction in the country, right? And so all these brands that start when they're young and they're exciting, they go through waves just like we do. And so I think it's really good to get into those markets. I remember when I was in grad school at UC Davis, and my professor, Charlie Banforth, was talking about if there was just a 0.1 increase in beer consumption in China, it would equate to, X amount of millions of barrels of beer that were sold, and just how crazy that was to think about. And so it's kind of the same for a lot of people. And so we don't do these drops all the time, but at certain times of the year where we are up here, it's very seasonal. It's really nice to have that in our back pocket to get that beer out there.
Have you seen, aside from the immediate financial benefit, has there been any, I don't know, other tangible ROI on any of this, or any tangible upside to?
We have people, just the other day, we had some people that drove up from the Front Range to come see us at our tap room because they had heard about us from their country of origin, and so they wanted to come see it for themselves. So they went to our tap room, which is obviously open to the public. Our barrel cellar, our original location, is only open for special events right now, and so they basically cold called us at the cellar in a very polite way, wouldn't take no for an answer, that they wanted to come. And of course, when they told me their story, I was like, absolutely, come on by. I've got a few minutes. I can happily show you around. So, it's just from that standpoint, we've seen pictures on Instagram of in a certain market where people were pouring our beer at their wedding, and they were taking these very traditional wedding photos alongside our beer, which was really crazy to see. So just kind of, seeing the importance of the beer to certain people and certain consumers in those areas has been something I think that wasn't expected right away.
You mentioned where you are in the state and being seasonal, and that's got to have its own stressors as well, right? Of if the tourist season is booming, then business is going to be booming. If it's not, it's going to be, really scary, I imagine. And then throw on top of that, as before we started recording, you're mentioning, it hasn't just been the pandemic, but also the wildfires in Colorado, and then mudslides in Colorado. So there are climate activities and extreme weather that you have to contend with as well.
Yeah.
What do you think long term? Pandemics are tough, but these fires seem to be happening more often, and these really once these century storms that used to call them now seems to be every 3 or 4 years. Have you started thinking long term of what that means for the brewery?
Yeah, I think it's and that's from it's just basically assuming both from a mental standpoint and from a business standpoint that's going to happen. So basically not counting our eggs until they hatch, kind of thing. So from managing cash and budgeting, we can't assume we're going to have a rockin' summer, and we've got to assume that something might happen. Hopefully it won't, obviously, but we've got to assume and plan for that so that we don't find ourselves in a position where we're assuming we're going to have sales for whatever reason. And so that's the biggest thing that I've been currently doing. I don't know what's more important from the mental aspect. So knowing that when it happens, there's not a mental breakdown, knowing that we've got something in place and we can survive it. And that comes from planning it from the financial things, I think.
Mentally, that's one of those things that we've been talking about for 2 years, certainly because of the pandemic and the stress that causes. How have you been trying to keep a level head through all of this?
I don't know. That's $1 million question.
I mean, have you been keeping a level head through all of this? I guess is the better question, but
Yeah,
the more accurate question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have. And I mean, it's just spending time with the family, trying to get out. Like last year when I thought maybe not last year, whenever it was the fires or if it was when the highway was shut down, regardless, when Glenwood Canyon was shut down in the last couple of years, we went fishing with my son and my son's friends to a little reservoir near our home up here, and there was nobody there. And so when that was for obvious reasons, but so it was enjoyable to be in a place like that where we weren't seeing the crowds, but at the same time that had other effects that were not great. So just trying to stay level-headed, get out, enjoy nature, know that these things are temporary, know that everybody in our valley is kind of experiencing the same thing and going through this. It's not just us. When those forces of nature occur. And so just trying to have that experience so that when it happens next year, it's not as big of a stressor.
Yeah. You use a lot of local ingredients in your beers. I know it's a calling card of yours, but you support a lot of local agriculture. With that weather, in that same weather vein, and I didn't mean it that way, but in that same thread of thinking about weather, it's not just your business, but it's the businesses that you work with as well. Are the farmers talking about this? Are they thinking long term? Are there things that might have to change that could eventually change the industry, change your beers?
I haven't heard too much about that. They, like last year there, when the slides happened last year. So the farmers, most of the ones we work with, they've got some sort of distribution in the Front Range, whether that be, farmers markets or getting their beer to a distributor in the Front Range.
Yeah.
So they've had to pivot from either moving their beer to someplace else. So maybe up to Wyoming or to Utah, as opposed to going east to the Front Range. But for the most part, they found a different route to get to the Front Range. It's so lucrative for them to have those markets and those stands there. Yeah. From a climate change standpoint, a big worry that a lot of those growers have is the water, and if they're going to be able to get water from the Colorado River.
Yeah,
if we're talking about the Palisade growers, and so that's I know that's something that is of concern to them, and that's a whole other topic of conversation.
But I mean, it's got to also be a concern to you of access to clean water or just access to water in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely crossed my mind. There's in our valley, there's so much. It's such a popular news topic to talk about the Colorado River, because obviously we're so dependent on that water for many reasons, like you said, from a drinking and production standpoint, but also from a tourism and recreation standpoint, let alone the agriculture aspect. And so it's something that's discussed up here all the time in the local papers. I don't know if the Front Range sees that too often, besides like the big stories that hit about the dropping amount of water in the Colorado River basin. But it's one of those things. It's kind of, there's a lot of things to worry about in the short term. And that's definitely a bigger picture thing that it's tough to think about too much on a day-to-day basis, just because of how overwhelming it could be if that were to occur. But yeah, from a generational standpoint, it's definitely something like, what's this valley going to look like in 50 years?
Yeah. What's exciting to you ingredient wise these days? You go through a lot of fruit. You're using more of it than ever before, it sounds like.
Yep.
What have you been messing around with recently where you've been surprised, pleased, joyful by the results?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind are pears. So we used pears last year for the first time. pears are one of the later fruits to mature, at least in Colorado. And so by the end of the summer, historically, we've kind of ran through the mature barrel stock that we would have. And you be using the last of that stock for grapes that we would be getting from Palisade. We love making grape beers. Last year, there was a late spring frost that just decimated the Colorado grape industry. So we were not able to get any Colorado grapes last year. And as a result, we had a little bit of beer left over. A grower from Paonia reached out to us and said they had 500 pounds of pears, Anjou pears that you can find, like you would find at a grocery store. Okay. This is from one of my favorite growers in the Paonia Hotchkiss area. And so we said, absolutely, we would love to try these. And so having never worked with pears before, it was very fun and exciting to see what we could get from them.
What did you get from them?
Just incredible complexity. We made 2 blends with them. So we did one that was about a lower fruiting rate, so around 1 pound per gallon. That beer, trying it, just reminded me of what our beers were like back in 2014 or 2015, back when the fruit was almost secondary to the base beer. Back when the base beer was, even when the beer was fresh, it was still the kind of the dominant characteristics of the fruited beer. Yeah. And so we got amazing, juicy pear flavors. Just like, it was, in hindsight, it's to be expected, right? Like when we make fruit beers, I really love how much the fruit shines. And so it was more of the same, but it's well carbonated. And it still has a lot of that beer complexity. So one of my hesitancies to use pears before was kind of the same hesitancy to use apples. From a cider standpoint, I didn't want people to think that, if they don't like cider or they don't like perry, that they wouldn't like these beers. And so it's been really fun to see that it is definitely still a beer with those pear flavors. And we did another version, which was about the 4 pound per gallon pear quality. And that one is just like juicy pear that I'm really excited about as well.
When it comes to wood, when it comes to barrels and aging, where are your preferences as a brewer? Like, what do you look for in barrels that you use?
We're always trying to find neutral French oak wine barrels of varying sizes. And so I'm not a big fan of vanilla in our standard farmhouse ales. We definitely do a lot of barrel aging with specialty spirit barrels. And in those instances, we're intentionally trying to get those very unique and specific barrel characteristics. But for the most part, for our base beers, we're trying to source neutral French oak wine barrels. So whether those be the standard Bordeaux barrels or the much bigger punch-ins, we're looking for neutral French oak characteristics. And so we'll go as far as steaming a barrel when we first get it. Okay. We've got barrel steamers, and then we'll also use a pressure washer to clean the wood to try to get any of the remaining wine character or wine stone that was in there that could affect the flavor of the beer.
What's the generational use of barrels when after you use them?
It could be one time, or it could be several times. And so now that we have our barrel steamer, we're able to get a lot more life out of a barrel, because previously, if we would empty a barrel and we couldn't fill it right away, it might turn acetic. And so we would have to dump that barrel a little bit more often. But now we have a lot better control. It's a lot less often we're tasting a barrel that has acetic qualities to it. So sometimes it's one use. Maybe something was in the barrel already, but whatever happened, we didn't like the beer. So we'll either dump the beer, or if it's, if it's a little acetic, we might use it in a blend for complexity. I love those barrels that just have a hint of acetic because it brings so much to a blend. But in that case, we would dump the barrel after. We wouldn't use it again, assuming that it would just get worse and worse over time. Or there's not often, but there's definitely times where a new barrel, the base beer didn't turn out for whatever reason. And so it's dump the beer, dump the barrel as well. So But sometimes it could be 4 or 5 years we're using the same barrels. The bigger the barrel, the more life we get out of it, because there's less oxygen ingress in those bigger puncheons as opposed to the smaller Bordeaux barrels. So we get a little bit more life out of those bigger barrels, which is very fortunate because the complexity that we get from those is just amazing.
Have you dialed in on a timing sweet spot that your beers need in the barrels to achieve that complexity that you're looking for?
No, because it's so seasonal. We have a heater in our barrel cellar. Our barrel cellar in the winter, we heat it at 60 or 62. So obviously maturation is gonna do is a lot different compared to the summer, when that room can get into the low 70s.
Okay.
And so based on the size of the barrel, a smaller barrel matures much faster than the bigger barrels. And so really that's where the blending comes into it. We're not, what drew me to making these beers was the art of blending and the magic, if you will, of barrel aging. How little control you might have over what happens in those barrels, as opposed to making a lager. If your yeast pitch is at this level and you've got this much oxygen, it's going to be ready to go in 4 to 6 weeks. And if your spec is 6 weeks, it's always going to be, if you're doing it the correct way, it can always be 6 weeks. What drew me to these is the uncertainty and the differentiation that can occur in barrel aging beer.
Where's your curiosity taking you these days?
Raw materials. We've been experimenting a lot with different oats in for one of our oat farmhouse ales, and spelt recently too. So our beers that are made with spelt, it's called Ghost Note, and that uses a small proportion of spelt, which not only changes the aroma of the beer to something in that spelt is causing our yeast to do something very very unique, but the body that we get in those spelt beers is and the mouthfeel, the texture is very interesting as well. Same with oats, but mostly from a aroma standpoint. I don't know if it's the fat in an oat or something that is causing our yeast to make incredibly, like, night and day different flavors and aromas in the resulting beer. And the only thing that's different about that would be the oats. And so seeing what quantity of oats and how that affects the flavors and the spelt as well has just been incredibly fun. So when we get to do blending sessions and playing around with all these different beers that we have, some are hoppy, some like the spelt and the oats and the different aromas, it's really, really fun and invigorating to get to play around with those.
What are some of the flavors and aromas that you're getting off of the yeasts?
Oh, I'm terrible at descriptions like that. I would say it's
you knew the question was coming.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I hope you did, but yeah. You're like, please don't ask. Please don't ask.
Yeah. No, it's it's a lot more fruity. The oat beers are a lot more fruity, like traditional citrus fruity, as opposed to maybe like the banana. Our Saison beer often has some strong banana characteristics, in my opinion, especially when they're younger. And so the differences, I think, would just be the citrus aspect for those. But yeah, no, I'm terrible at description beer descriptions.
Okay. So raw ingredients.
My blending book, if you looked at my blending note book, it says, I've joked about this a lot over the years, but it's my level of, I can understand what I'm saying, but it's like, this barrel's good. This barrel's really good. Like it's embarrassing, honestly, but that's
it's the Casey scale of goodness.
Yeah, exactly. Like this barrel gets 2 stars and this barrel gets a A+. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense, but to me.
We're going to need the beer archaeologist to go through your notes 100 years from now to try to decipher it all.
Yeah, I was like, what the hell? How is this guy making beer?
How is this brewery so popular? I can't make heads or tails of this.
Right.
Anything else on the I don't want to move away too quickly from that. If you still had other raw ingredients thoughts as where you're being led.
No, I think that's really the key right
That's
now.
the big, yeah.
I love our yeast culture and our house culture. So we occasionally will play around with something different, but for the most part, we're pretty consistent with that. And so now we're just playing around with time in the barrel and having more barrel stock so that we have more to choose from when it comes time to blend. And then playing around with different ingredients, even some hopping notes as well. So that's really where I've been focused on is changing small things mostly on the hot side of it to see what happens after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months down the road. So that's what's been exciting for me.
Would it be fair to say that when you launched and in your first couple of years, that there was a lot of hype around your brewery?
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say for sure.
I recall big beers, Belgians, and barley wines one year early when you were just opened, and you had the longest line in the place. And next to you at the festival was a long established brewery that at one point had, that same sort of hype moniker and had a fairly well-known and influential brewer at the table next to yours. And people would walk up and grab a sample and then walk away, but there was no line. And it was amazing to me at that point to see the generational shift in beers and beer consumers and what they were going for. And I don't even know why I'm hiding it. It was Tommy Arthur and it was Lost Abbey.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if you remember this year of the festival. You were pretty busy.
Yeah, I mean, I now that you said it, I think I remember. I think I remember that for sure.
Yeah, and it was just fascinating to see that at one point, and 5 years earlier, the line would have been for Tommy and Tommy's beers, and it was just fascinating to see this shift. And now that you have been around for as long as you have, and I know the pandemic has made it tough in the last 2 years, but do you still have that same level of rabid fandom and people trying to come and taste your beers and get FaceTime with you at these festivals when you have gone to them?
Geez, I honestly haven't been to one since pre-COVID. So this will be my first one. This first one since COVID started this weekend up at Side Project. But
do you want that?
I mean,
do you like it?
Yeah, of course, for sure. Any excitement about a brand is obviously very important. And so at the same time, it's just I think the culture has really changed a lot. Whereas people aren't necessarily traveling as much as they used to for these types of events. There's still a lot of people that do, obviously, but I think especially after COVID, people started to expect or not want to. They were looking for ease of purchase, if you will. And so while the for any brewery, not just for me, but while the hype, it's kind of shifted to where it's occurring. And a lot of that's occurring online now, I think. So you might not necessarily see it with lines anymore, but you're seeing it in other areas of the business. So it's definitely changed. And like any brewery, any business, when they're the new kid on the block, there's going to be a base, what's the word I would use? An expected amount of, since they're the new kid on the block, hype, if you will.
Yeah.
And then it's really just up to the business to try to maintain that in whatever way that could be. And so for us, it's been staying small and true to our roots. Like the biggest thing is we still ferment with in our open punch-ins. We haven't expanded to the demand that we had early on. We always wanted to keep it small and with a quality focus. A lot of sour breweries, when they grow, they might switch from fermenting in smaller barrels to bigger foeders, and that's going to change the flavor. And then having increasing production is for some reason detracts from customers want for the beer often. And so it's just one of those things we're doing. We want to keep it small. I remember somebody called it a boutique. We're like what did they call it? Like I'm gonna screw it up, but it's like a boutique brewery or a lifestyle brewery. They call this a lifestyle brewery.
Lifestyle brewery.
Lifestyle brewery, in the sense that we weren't trying to be, we wanted to have a sustainable business model that worked for us, and weren't trying to grow to go crazy and just be working all the time. We wanted to be able to call off, end of the day early if we wanted to go hit a powder day or hit a nice hatch on the river. And that's been working for us and for all of our employees as well. So yeah, it changes over time. It's pretty crazy, but it's just one of those things you got to roll with. It happens to everybody.
As you start to think about this weekend and beer festivals being back, pandemic be damned kind of thing, there's good sides to beer festivals. There's bad sides to beer festivals. And I know your friends are throwing a lot of these, so you don't want to, talk too much out of turn, but, what would you like to see changed beer festival wise, as we have this chance to sort of hit, a little bit of a reset button, or to try to make things different from what they were before?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I haven't been thinking about the festivals for so long. I'll have to dig here for a sec, but I think my favorite festivals I've been to are the ones that aren't shoulder to shoulder, packed. And so being able to have a beer festival where it's a little bit more laid back, you're not in a constant fear of missing out on something, knowing that you'll get a shot at what you're really excited for. I really like that. At the same time, I've never thrown a festival. I'm sure logistically that's a very challenging, because you got to have a budget and figure out how to make it all work. But the ones that are more relaxed are the ones I like. So oftentimes there'd be like the private hour before some festivals that we've been to in the past. Didn't JBF? Yeah, like JBF had that like on the Thursday night session, wasn't it? Something like where it's smaller and more intimate before the masses get in. And so those kind of things are fun, where you have a little bit more time to either to talk or to get around the festival to try what you're looking for before the long lines form or beers might run out.
What about serving sizes? What's an appropriate serving size at a beer festival?
I think it would depend on how many samples that there might be there. And so,
well, I mean, for your beers, what do you think is a good amount where you want people to, is an ounce enough?
Oh, I don't know. If only for, if I may, if only for the presentation. So even though it's a beer festival, you might have a dirty glass, but I like to pour more than you might need, just to get the foam to form, or to be able to see the color of the beer, as opposed to if it's a smaller pour, it might be harder to see the color of the beer that you're looking at. And so if those very minute details, if you will. So like whenever I try a bottle of aging beer, I'll pour a full glass. I'll usually only take one sip, two tops. The rest of it gets dumped. So I totally understand if somebody's not going to want to drink 2 or 3 ounces of our beer at a beer festival because they're trying to pace themselves, or there's a lot of different beers to try. But I think it's important to at least have the serving size planned for that much, if only for those small, really dumb things that most people don't think about, except for the brewers, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, moderation is obviously key.
Of course.
Yeah, these beers aren't, I haven't been to a fest in forever, so I don't know what the age group would be for these consumers much more anymore. But I think most of us, as we get older, we're not looking to, feel too bad the next day. And so, if only from that standpoint, it's the balance of available beer with the serving size should be obviously very, very important.
I keep having all of these old guy conversations these days, as we're not kidding, our 40s and 50s and that kind of thing, and not wanting to feel too wrecked next day. Do you think the type of beers that you're making could ever make inroads in the NA space?
From the sours, I mean, I just don't know enough about the production of those beers to have any idea. I just tried an NA IPA from Untitled Art, which blew my mind. Blew my mind how great it was. And so whoever figured out that method of creating an NA IPA, it's amazing. So I think it could obviously be done. I think the biggest thing would be the size of our process. It'd be incredibly, and from what my limited knowledge about this, it would be pretty hard to do based on how small we are, and we're not doing big volumes of big batch volumes.
Sure. I've been asking folks on the show for quite a while now. The setup is at some point during the pandemic, my wife and I were rewatching The Good Place, the Kristen Bell sitcom, and there's a whole premise of the show where you can walk through a green door, and the green door will take you anywhere at any point in time with whoever you wanted. And so if such a door existed on this plane of existence, and you could finish this conversation and walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world with anybody that you wanted, where would you want the door to take you? Who'd you want to be with? And what would you like in your glass?
It would probably be my grandpa. So my grandpa had he was a small business owner, and he worked. So he had a small textile business in Toronto. I assume that would be around the 1950s, 1960s, and 70s. There's not a lot of entrepreneurs in my family, and so I would love to have a beer, whatever he was drinking. I would love to have a beer with him, and just kind of talk shop, talk about the highs and lows of being a small business owner. I never got to talk to him about that too much when I knew him in my life. So that would be that was a no-brainer when you asked the question. That I think about that a lot. It would be very fun to talk to him, and if we were talking at similar ages in our life too, I think about that as well. How much fun it would be to be able to talk to people when you're at the same age, kind of like more like friends as opposed to a grandfather-son or grandfather grandson relationship, and just like peers. And that's what I would do. Whatever he was drinking at the time, probably Molson, maybe Labatt's, but whatever he wanted, I'd love to have a beer with him.
Oh, I like that. That's really nice. Thanks for being on the show this week. I appreciate you taking the time out of your barrel schedules and your upcoming social Brewfest calendar, social schedule. But thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This was really fun. I love the questions, and this is great.
All right. So tell me, what festivals are you going to, or do you have on your schedule? Let me know. You can email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can get with me on Twitter @John_Hall. And if you're going to be at Wakefest and you see me walking around, please say hi. Don't forget to check out beeredge.com for our This Week in Rauk Beer and Defend Pilsner merch, and to follow along on social media @TheBeerEdge. Of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's @TWRaukBeer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you would like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to sponsor @beeredge.com. And speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by the World Beer Awards. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair of judges for the U.S. portion this year, and we're bringing experienced, fair-minded, and engaged judges to Washington, D.C. later on this summer to blind taste test beers and to hand out medals. The World Beer Awards assures that each beer is judged both rigorously and fairly to give its best chance in the competition. If you're a professional brewer, learn more about the competition and categories and sign up to enter at worldbeerawards.com. Again, check out worldbeerawards.com to learn more and to sign up. A reminder, Go check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. On this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.